There are a lot of things people do that seem completely normal, things that no one really questions because everyone does them. But as someone who lives a more minimalist lifestyle, I've noticed that some of these habits don't actually make much sense when you stop and think about them. Now, I'm not saying that you are a bad person if you do these things, but a lot of them seem unnecessary, stressful, or even a little weird once you take a closer look. So in this video, I'm going to go through 10 normal things people do, and I'll also rank each of them based on how difficult I would personally find it to live that way. Some of them I kind of understand, while others would feel like a total nightmare to me. Let's get into it. The first thing is regularly upgrading, updating, or redecorating. Some people really enjoy upgrading their stuff all the time, whether it's their phone, furniture, wardrobe, or even home decorations. There's this habit of constantly refreshing things even when nothing is actually broken or outdated in any way. And I think marketing plays a huge role in this. We are constantly told that newer means better, that we need the latest version of everything. And in some ways, also society reinforces this. Like if you have the newest devices, you're seen as doing well in life. And honestly, I get it. It's fun to change things up. But when you look at it from a minimalist perspective, it's kind of weird. Beyond just the money, because if we are honest, this habit gets very expensive very fast. It's also mentally exhausting. Always keeping up with trends, always feeling like what you have isn't good enough, always chasing for something better. It's a never-ending cycle. That's why I think minimalists tend to stick with what works. If something still serves a purpose, they see no reason to replace it. Now, I won't say that this is the worst habit out there. I would say it's a 6 on my scale, because at least you are replacing, not just adding all the time more stuff. The second one is gifting physical things without knowing if the person needs them. Gift giving is such a big part of many cultures. Birthdays, holidays, weddings, there's usually an expectation that a gift should be involved. And for most people, giving something physical feels like the best way to show appreciation. Looking at it through a minimalist lens, it's interesting how often gifts are given without really knowing if the person wants or needs the item. People mean well, of course, but sometimes a gift can feel more like a responsibility than a thoughtful gesture. If someone gives you something you don't really need, now you have to figure out what to do with it. Do you keep it out of guilt, try to find a place for it, or just quietly get rid of it later? This is why many minimalists often see this random gift giving quite strange. It assumes that more stuff equals more happiness, when for many, accumulating things just leads to clutter. I think receiving unnecessary gifts would feel weirder for me than actually giving them. I don't know that many minimalists, so if I were to give someone a gift, they might actually appreciate it even if they don't really need it. But as someone who prefers intentional purchases, getting something random definitely would feel off for me. So let's say this is a 4 on my scale. The third normal thing is constantly adding more choices. With this I mean always expanding the number of options you have, whether it's apps, subscriptions, clothing, or accessories. It's the habit of signing up for multiple services that do pretty much the same thing, or owning multiple different watches and jewelry just to have variety. But from a minimalist perspective, too many choices don't always improve life. It often does the opposite. At least I have noticed this. Instead of making things easier, it just creates decision fatigue. Choosing between 5 sweaters is simple, but when you have 13 or 15 or 18 nearly identical ones, it becomes much harder to decide. And the same goes, of course, for digital clutter. Having 5 different music apps or 3 calendars doesn't make life more organized. It just adds extra steps. So minimalists prefer having enough rather than excess. It's not about limiting yourself in a restrictive way, it's about making life just easier. I have to say, for me, this habit would be one of the hardest to deal with. because one of the reasons I became a minimalist was because I hate having too many options. I would rate it a 7. The fourth one is buying things just because they are on sale. I think most of us have fallen for this at some point. I definitely have. You see something 50% off and suddenly it feels like extremely smart decision. You think you saved money, but in reality, if you didn't need it, you didn't actually save anything. You just spent money you wouldn't have otherwise. That's why minimalists, or at least I, find this habit quite strange. Or I don't know if I find it like really strange, because I understand all the psychological tricks behind it, all the marketing, all the urgency, and making it feel like you are missing out on a huge opportunity if you don't take this deal. So I kind of understand it, but I just think that people should do a better job in this, because the price tag shouldn't be the main reason to buy something. What actually matters is whether the item adds value to your life, not how much of a deal it was. That said, I don't see this one as one of the worst habits. If I bought something unnecessary, I could always donate it or give it away. It's wasted money for sure, but not the most overwhelming thing to deal with. That's why I would rate this one a 3. Not ideal, but definitely not the most stressful habit on this list, unless you keep everything you bought, of course. The fifth thing is keeping instructions and manuals for everything. When you spend a lot of money on something, keeping the manual or the instructions feels like the responsible thing to do, just in case you need it later or something happens. And that's why I get it. This habit makes somewhat sense, and especially made a lot of sense in the past, because before the only way to find the instructions was to keep the original booklet. But these days, almost every manual you could ever need is just a quick Google search away. And that's why I think that this is quite unnecessary habit these days. It just adds to the paper clutter in your home. And if we are honest, do you really need a manual to figure out how to use a toaster or a lamp? Probably not, but I don't think this habit is that bad, especially if you are not that tech savvy. Manuals don't take that much space, and sometimes actually it's faster to just take the booklet and read that than find the version online. And that is why I will rate this 1. Not really a problem, just something that is a little outdated. 6. Needing a different outfit for every occasion. Many people feel like every event requires a different outfit. One for birthdays, one for going out with friends, one for casual dinners, and another one for Fridays at work. Even though all these are fairly similar situations, there's this idea that each one still needs its own look. And to be honest, I'm not sure how normal this actually is. I think it also depends a lot on personality and gender. Generally speaking, I have seen men take a simpler approach to this. If they have a suit or a nice buttoned up shirt, that usually works for most occasions. But for women, there seems to be more pressure to constantly switch things up, or at least these are my observations. A dress or shirt that is worn only once and then pushed to the back of the closet is basically wasted space, wasted money, wasted resources. So instead, I think many minimalists, or at least me, what I do is just have a few versatile, well-made pieces that are kind of fit in many different occasions. And I don't have any problems re-wearing the same clothes all the time, because I love what I'm wearing. Why wearing something I love would ever be a problem? So for me, this habit would be a really tough one. I would either have a terrible decision fatigue from picking what to wear, or then I would end up with way too much clutter, because I would realistically only wear 1 or 2 favorites. I love to be simple when it comes to what I wear, so I would rate this one an 8. Number 7, always buying new. Some people automatically buy things brand new, even when they know that they'll only use them once or twice. And I get it, buying new is often the quickest and most convenient option. Borrowing, renting, or searching for something secondhand takes more effort, and in some cases, it might not seem like it's worth it. If we look at this from a minimalist point of view, this habit of always buying new things is quite wasteful, both in terms of money and resources. There are so many things that are not worth owning long term. which is why it makes sense to get comfortable, in my opinion, with renting, borrowing, or buying used whenever it is possible. And if that idea for you feels very uncomfortable, it's worth asking why. Like, is it about the convenience? Is it because you want the feeling of ownership? It's what many of us have been conditioned to do, but at the same time, it's a huge reason why we have so much waste and clutter in our world. So I would rate this one a 2. Not the worst habit, but definitely something that could be avoided in many situations. 8. Shopping for entertainment, not out of necessity. For many people, shopping isn't just about buying what they need. It is something to do. It's a way to relax, socialize, or pass the time, even when there's no specific reason to buy anything. And with online shopping, it is even easier to do out of boredom. In my opinion, shopping should solve a problem and not an emotional problem. If you need something, you buy it. But when it comes to a hobby or you're shopping because you're bored, it just often leads to clutter, wasted money, and purchases that don't really add any value in your life. Buying more stuff means owning more stuff, and that usually means more stress, at least at some point, because every new item has to be stored, cleaned, and taken care of, and over time, the more you buy, the more overwhelming it all becomes. That's why I think minimalists prefer to be very intentional about what they bring into their lives, and shopping for fun doesn't really fit into that mindset. Personally, I have never been a shopper myself. Well, maybe just a little bit when I was a teenager, but even then it wasn't something I did often. And now the idea of spending money on things I don't need just feels very uncomfortable to me. So I would rate this one a 9, because I cannot imagine myself spending just for the sake of it. 9. Decorating every surface. There's often an expectation that every space should be filled with something, whether it's a shelf, a table, a countertop, or an empty wall. A blank space, a blank anything, looks unfinished. An empty table feels too bare. A minimalist room is often seen as it is missing something rather than just being intentional. But for minimalists, not every space needs to be filled. An empty space really isn't a problem. In fact, having too much can have the opposite effect, making a space feel visually overwhelming rather than inviting and cozy. For example, for me personally, a cluttered environment is mentally really exhausting. Like if it's my home or I'm visiting somebody or even like public places, if there's too much going on, it's way harder for me to focus and feel peaceful in that space. That said, I live with someone who does quite a lot of artsy stuff, so we have quite a few decorations that are all handmade around the house, and even though I know that we could live with a fewer of them, sometimes you just have to find the middle ground. So I would rate this one a 5, because I think that it kind of depends on how it is done. If the space is packed with random meaningless things, then for me it's more like a 9. But if the decorations are really thoughtful and well placed, then it can be even much lower, maybe even less than a 5. Of course, I left the worst one for last. Number 10, keeping everything and never decluttering. Too many people hold on to everything and only declutter when it's absolutely necessary, like before moving or when their storage space finally runs out, or when things just get so overwhelming that there is no other choice. And until then, things just keep accumulating, filling up shelves, closets, garages, and eventually entire rooms. It might not seem like a big deal, of course, at first, but over time, the constant presence of unused, forgotten, or just too many things can start to feel quite overwhelming. For me, living in a chaotic and cluttered space would be an absolute nightmare. I would struggle really a lot, and my quality of life would be so much worse, because that would affect my focus and mental energy, which then affects like everything in my life. So that's why this one is a 10. Definitely the hardest habit for me to deal with. Let me know in the comment section below which one of these 10 would be the worst one for you. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to stay kind and meaningful in your own beautiful journey. See you in the next one.